Um, the standard just talks about how the standard came into being in terms of what it's providing to do. And there's a few comments here. Again, same sort of thing. We could refine this by improving the text. We could say this in different ways. So again, lots of different views about things, and the changes are fairly simple, but they have some long-term ramifications, and we'll talk about those when we get to the main part of the standard, which is just past here. So again, similar sorts of comments about things that you could do to phrase or word these things better. And there's no doubt that some of those will be taken on board. So from here, people are making comments. All those comments go back to the committee. The committee looks at it, and we come to what's called a consensus. And a consensus simply means an agreement. There's two sorts. We can have a full consensus or 100% consensus, or we can have a majority consensus. And so far, the committee's been working on a full consensus. That is, where possible, we try and get something that makes all parties are satisfied. This next stage will have to be a little bit more challenging because we're going to get down to some fine little nitty gritties. So the scope, there's just one comment on the scope component. But here in terms of what this is about, and this mostly here is about, can we order our paragraphs and change it a bit? And the answer is yes, of course, no problems at all. The normative references. So there are things in standards that are normative, and there's things that are informative. Normative means this is the way it must be done. Informative means this is the way it could be or should be done, not necessarily has to be done. So those two things. So pruning of amenity trees is there, and temporary fences and hoarding part 2 discusses the fence components. The rest is not an essential component. So it's reference to, but not normative. That is, no need to necessarily comply. The first big bit is the definitions. So some of those are not overly critical in terms of how things are defined, and some of them are. You guys still with me?
Yep.
Yep, great. So absorbing roots, yeah, there's some discussions there. Benson says, look, fine roots. The problem, of course, with fine roots is what a fine root is not clear. An absorbing root, the advantages is what the function is. It's functionally driven. But again, that's something that a committee will sit down and discuss. There's talks about different bits and pieces, development, what is involved in that. Diameter at standard height. There's our first change. It used to be DBH, if you remember. You all remember that?
Yes.
Now it's DSH. And the argument in the formulation stage was, look, really breast height in some ways is not really an appropriate measure. And I'm not the wokest person, but that just seemed to be silly. If you're going to do anything, it should be DCH, diameter at chest height. But this is about a standard. So diameter at standard height, we know what that height is, 1.4 meters. So we just figured that avoids any issues later on with woke discussions.
My assistant will be very disappointed. She quite liked the concept of DBH.
I'm sorry. Just the way that it is. It may get changed back, but I doubt it. I think it makes sense. Then our next.
But also, sorry, Mark, the standard we'll accept as 1.4 metres, but a lot of city councils in Melbourne, for example, use 1.5 metres for their permit definitions, and it just seems more sensible.
There's just a different. Well, it's been DBH has been 1.4 the whole time. There are other pieces of legislation that do it at 1.3, and so the DBH in Melbourne is the DBH. It may not necessarily be the DSH, and the DSH referring to the standard itself. So it avoids that confusion of 3 dBHs. We have one thing only in this, and it's this diameter at standard height. But again, if it's not what you're thinking it should be, argue a case, put some comments in there, explain what you think a better solution would be and why, and that's something we can look at. Whoops. Okay. The first major change in real big ways, and probably the biggest change, is 1.3.9, minor encroachment. Encroachment that is 20% or less of the nominal root area, and we'll define NRA next, and that is outside the structural root zone. So structural root zone has stayed, but a minor encroachment has gone from 10% to 20%. And there was discussion, everything from 50% down to one comment that's been made in public comment by Benson, arguably correct, 15 times trunk diameter it should be where we start. And I'm not going to say that any of those are necessarily wrong. Somewhere there's got to be a drawing point, and there's been some clever suggestions. I think it's a young lass, Jackie Brown, gave some quite clever thoughts that may be something that we might not get into the standard this time round, but the standard is going to continue to sit and continue to work on refining the standard. So what we're proposing here is by no means a written in stone and never going to change. We know that it still needs development, and it may well be that that's picked up at some future development. Any questions on minor encroachment or any comments on minor encroachment?
So do you have any comments regarding the some of the comments about not being happy with the increase to 20%? And they were saying that it's too much, or it hasn't been, there's been no data or proof shown.
Oh, good. Okay, so I can address that very briefly. No, there isn't any data to support the 10%, 20%, the 10%. There's no data for either. The only data says that at 15 times trunk diameter, there can be some impact, but it's negligible. But there is also some data that says 83% is okay, and that's transplanting. So, and that's the most extensive data set of the lot. So that's where we strike some problems. If you can move the tree, sure as hell you ought to be able to protect it with the same area, with other parameters considered. So it's certainly something that the committee was aware might be controversial, and it's something that will be discussed undoubtedly for a meeting or so as we work towards the final version of this version of the draft. So the as I said, this is by no means the end of things. This is a progression towards trying to make a really great document.
So we're still going with 12 times trunk diameter.
12 times trunk diameter, yep, but with a 20% encroachment as a minor encroachment. And realistically, there's this concept of a minor encroachment isn't based in anything either. It's just simply saying that, look, if you've got a 10% encroachment, you need to start seeking council consent. What happened, in fact, that's not what happened. What we found was that frequently consent authorities were taking that as being, well, you can't have anything more than that. Now, that's changing. And again, this may well change back in time, or it may not get changed this time round as we try and communicate. One of the key things that the committee was aware of was that the standard is often misunderstood. It's been understood to be a document that prohibits a major encroachment rather than a document that simply outlines the process of dealing with a major encroachment.
Just one question on that NRA. Is there an upper or lower limit to the NRA, or is it just simply that 12 times?
Just 12 times. It's just an area to consider. It's our starting point. As I said, Benson, if you read the notes, Andrew makes a great comment. 15 times is probably a better point. And, you know, that again will be something that the committee discusses backwards and forwards. And none of them, the 10%, the 20%, the 15 does have a research paper to support it, but the impact is negligible.
I'm not sure if you got what I was meaning, Mark. So the current standard has an upper and a lower limit, so minimum of 2 metres and an upper of 15.
No, I don't think so, Peter. That's a good question. I don't think it's got an upper. There's, again, makes no sense as to why you would have an upper for a tree that's bigger and older, and why you'd have a minimum, because, of course, the moment you plant a 400-litre plant, it's now got a, you know, 3 months later, it's got a situation where it's now protected by a 2-metre radius, whereas before it was protected with a 300 diameter rib plate.
Yep.
So I don't think that an upper or minimum, but again, if you think that's something that should be there, by all means suggest it. I think it's just one of those things that got removed in the process.
Sure.
Most of the rest of there should and shall make sense. Structural roots, structural root zone, what a tree is, tree protection area. So now we've got rid of the tree protection zone. And the reason we got rid of the tree protection zone is we had 2 tree protection zones, arguably 3. We had the tree protection zone that was 12 times trunk diameter. Then we had the tree protection zone that you're going to protect in the end. And so the decision was made to have 2 different terms. And nominal root area was removed the tree protection zone at one end, and tree protection area is what removed it at the second end. So that's been a change. And same, we had 2 tree protection plans. We had a tree protection plan recommendations, or I think it was recommendations, and a tree protection plan drawing. So now there's a tree protection plan and a tree protection specifications. So we're saying those 2 are 2 distinct things that will probably occur in the one document, but we would ideally like both. How are you going to do show us a plan? How are you going to do it? What has to be done? Tell us what we should and shouldn't be doing. And then woody roots. And that's the end of the definitions, but that's the primary changes you've just seen there in that one section. So from there on in, everything.
I'm a little bit interested in the definition for work. Any physical activity in relation to land that is specified by the relevant authority. That seems like an odd definition to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because what maybe that is a poor choice of word. It maybe should read as specified by the relevant authority. But this is an Australian standard, and what we found in the process of working on the standard is different states had interpreted it differently, and different states had modified it to fit in with their statutory requirements. So we're having, for example, in Victoria, the process happening differently than it was in New South Wales or in Queensland. And so a part of what we've been trying to do, Peter, is homogenise the language and the processes so that it works in all of Australia, rather than people just ignoring it and saying, well, that's not how we do it, so we just ignore the standard for that component.
Maybe it is a poor choice of words because it reads to me as if that's the activity as specified by the relevant authority, and any other activity that happens to be not specified but may be carried out isn't therefore work under this definition.
Yeah, that's correct. So can you give me an example of what you think might be? For example, I can think of one, running the car backwards and forwards into the backyard past a tree. That's not considered work. Even though it'll affect the tree, it's not covered under this piece of this standard. It's not something that the local authority may be able to even deal with.
But it's still going to affect the tree. I would have thought that.
Yes, but it's not development activity. It's simply misuse of the property.
Oh,
So,
have to have a think about that. So I think that one of the definitions for development is events, isn't it?
yeah. So events are, and so that's defined. And so it may well be that, you want to have a party
So
in
you
the
need
local
to
park.
drive your car backwards and forwards under the tree. So if you're just doing it, then it's not work. But if it's in relation to an event, then it is work.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the nature of trying to specify things. There's got to be some limit somewhere. Otherwise, we'd be trying to. It wouldn't be protection of trees and development sites. It'd be protection of trees on all land use activities. Does it make sense?
Yep. Okay.
So next one, planning the tree protection process. Some general comments. I don't think there's anything there. Oh yeah, there it is. Scope. So that's just a scope, and again, people have expressed views, and this is this public comment stage, and you can log on. Anyone can log on and go through and see these things. Include the same list of users as in the preface someone suggested. Then someone also said, write the preface this way. There's a better way to write it. Include the same list of users. Yeah. A flowchart has been suggested here. Now, we already know we've had this discussion, and Amy's made a great comment. She's got a flowchart version there, but we've agreed that the flowchart won't come into this version. It'll come into a later version at this stage, because simply to get a flowchart correct with all the nuances, we figured would take us more time than we've got to deal with it. So we'll finish the standard this time round, and we have 3 years to 5 years to get the next version of the standard sorted out. And a flowchart has certainly been suggested in the next version. Whether it comes in or not is up to the committee, but it certainly has been discussed. Then our normative references again, terms and definitions we've done. It's not. Okay. Tree protection process. The tree protection process depends on the cooperation of all involved, blah, blah. And then you start to see this new language. For those involved in site works, to maintain the tree protection area and adhere to the tree protection specifications. So again, some improvement, I think, in the clarity, but by all means, Peter, certainly not perfection, and we wouldn't suggest that it is. We have a flow chart. This has just been updated, and I believe someone picked up there's a couple of errors in this. So again, it's just the same thing, but with the establish and delineate a tree protection area, update the tree protection plan specification. And that, for example, represents a process in Victoria and Western Australia. They have this process of having putting forward documentation saying this is what we want to do, coming to a final agreement with the consent authority, and then at that point in time, the documentation is all finalised and approved to the consent authority's approval. I think it's a bit backwards personally, and anyone that lives in New South Wales would probably find it the same way. But it's the norm in Victoria, and it's the norm in Perth. So we need to make the standard useful for both parties, not just for one side. The planning stage. Where are we? site survey, and there's been some comments on the site survey. So this just emphasises my point that NRA versus TPA are quandary. Why would the topographical survey not consider works within the crown spread? It's because this is the preliminary stage. So this person has made the comment, Andrew. Oh yeah, Andrew. Okay. Andrew is struggling with how we've worded it, and that clearly shows that we haven't communicated as effectively as we'd like. So nominal root area is just what you're starting with. It's not what you're going to enclose. It's got nothing to do with what you've got enclosed. It's that area defined by 12 times trunk diameter. Does that make sense?
It seems to me that the NRA's main claim to fame or main usefulness is to be subjected to the calculation of the incursion. And after that, there doesn't seem to be any more use for it.
Absolutely, Peter. You got it 100%. It's the trigger point. So the standard does two things. It sets a trigger point and it sets processes. The trigger point is, when do we need an arborist? Well, okay, we need an arborist when there's development. We need an arborist when there's development and there's going to be an incursion. And then at some point, the arborist has to do something. And that some point is at 20% under the proposed draft. At 20%, the arborist needs to demonstrate the tree remain viable. And that assumption, it's making an assumption. It says that cutting it on one side only at 5 times trunk diameter, 6 times trunk diameter, is probably not going to affect the tree significantly if that's all you did wrong. Does that make sense?
I would like to see that, maybe not process, but that idea more clearly spelt out, because the way it is at the moment looks very much like the NRA is replacing the tree protection zone, but it's actually quite a different thing. And as we just agreed, the NRA now is only just looking at that incursion percentage, whereas the actual boots on the ground is all being done by the TPA now.
Exactly. Whereas previously we had the one word for both, and that was TPZ.
I don't see that process being spelt out at all.
I think it is there, but look, again, Peter, it's not.
I had to have a look at the diagram and realise that there's actually no NRA shown on the diagram, and I scratched my head and went, what? And then when I dug through to what it all meant, that's when I came to that conclusion. But I think it's and you can see Andrew is struggling with that as well. I think it would
look, several people have, and it's something that, again, would really appreciate you going in and just making those comments so that the committee can look at these things and say, okay, is there a way to better express this? And as I said, it really is. If we understand the standard is not a set of specifications, but a set of trigger points and processes.
I think it could be done just simply by adding that clarity, or that, a couple of sentences to.
Sure, add those in, Peter.
Perhaps the definition or somewhere in it, just to make it clear that, hey, this is now a different thing.
Yeah, I think that's easy to do, but we've just got to do it. And it's a question of where. So maybe under here, make those comments, and again, the committee can look at it.
Okay.
And there's a committee decision, and we all understand that a committee is the organism that designed a duck, and they ended up with a platypus. So we may not get it quite right, but we'll try our best. And again, each of the sections you click at, by the way, if you hadn't realised, have the comments there. So preliminary tree assessment, we want to know. So this is the preliminary stage. And on the preliminary stage, you would indicate where the nominal root area is, because there's no design. And because there's no design, we don't have to think about tweaking or adjusting the tree protection area. it's once the design comes forward. So the TPA is designed in response to protection of the tree in view or in light of a particular proposed development activity.
Do you
So
think that this change is likely to change the emphasis on what we look at and consider from the old tree protection zone to the crown? Because basically the crown is now becoming, according to the diagram, driving that tree protection area.
No, it just shows you where. So the diagram again is not necessarily fully represented. The diagram says that if the crown is important for some reason, that's where it'll be. It's not meant to say that it should always be there.
That's what the diagram indicates.
The diagrams are symbolic. If we had to draw every possible combination, it'd be another 40 or 50 pages long.
Yeah,
and so,
not sure I agree with that. I just think that when you look at it, this is the conclusion that you would draw. And we discussed a little while ago that the reason for one of the reasons for making these changes is that even though the standard set out what should happen, LGAs were running off with their own definitions.
It's not just LGAs, Peter. It's arborists of all sorts.
So I just think that if you're going to the diagram, then it should be a little bit more clearer what's actually going on. What does this mean?
Well, I think they're good comments to go back to making. Are there ways that we can better communicate? So, if, for example, you're building a one-story house under a Crimbia citriodora that's 18 meters high in the first branch, or height to lowest branch is 12 meters, the canopies may be completely irrelevant. If you're building a apartment block right beside the same tree and it's a 6-story apartment block, then the canopy becomes relevant.
What about the situation with palm trees? Because under the current standard, the palm tree's crown is protected by an increased zone compared with the trunk diameter.
Yeah, so it's currently frond length plus 1 meter, or canopy spread plus 1 meter. That has been changed in the standard, and again, it's hard coming up with generalized rules. Again, these aren't things that are normative and fixed in stone. There's no 12 commandments and then you're going to get slain. These are points at which we have said the profession should generally be comfortable working within. So not ideal, not suggesting that we've got the language right, but we're trying to get it right and feeding back the comment. Again, because we're dealing with it all the time, we already have our head around what a NRA is, so we don't need to hear that again. By the way, someone suggested some alternate terms, and they were really quite good. So, it may not even be NRA in the end, but that preliminary protection area and the actual protection area, they're two different things. And the only reason the crown image is there is to show how the crown may impact in terms of a protection area where that's critical. It's not that that's the only option. But yes, Peter, maybe we should have one of those drawings.
Actually, the tree protection area is in these diagrams is well outside the crown.
Yeah. And that would be where we're trying to keep the crown in its full. So we're building beside a heritage fig tree, and we're not going to accept any canopy pruning. That's where it would be.
But the diagram doesn't give any indication as to how that's arrived at. It's just
Yep, Peter.
Thing is that it's bigger than the crown, but we don't know how much bigger or why it's bigger.
I think a better caption may be something that's needed there. So make a note in your comment. This does not communicate well. It infers that all tree protection areas should be bigger than the crown spread and by an unspecified amount. And that's something that we can look at working on. Again, if we don't get to see how other people are reading and interpreting it, we're going to have issues in terms of trying to figure it out for ourselves.
Mm.
So please feel free to I won't promise you I won't take any offense to it.
I don't care if you do.
Yeah, but I'm not going to. I think that's exactly what this process is about. Is we've had a committee of about 8 people. 5 or 6 of them worked fairly dedicatedly on trying to get this done within the time frame. And one of the problems that happens when you're working on a standard like this is you get caught into the standard and the standard language.
Mm.
So your head all of a sudden starts thinking as you discuss things, not necessarily as you're communicating it. And so when you feedback and say it's not communicating well, I think that's a great process.
Mm.
And you've got until the end of this month to comment. So just a few days. Is it the end of this month or the 5th of next month? It's a short period of time.
Mm.
So the tree protection area, the principal means of protecting trees determined by the project arborist and shown on a tree protection plan to be isolated or managed so that the tree remains viable. So it's not determined by what that illustration says, Peter. It is determined by the thing. Determining the nominal root area, we tell you how to.
I've got another question about that tree protection area. So sometimes we build stuff in the let's call it tree protection zone.
In the tree protection area, yep.
Yep, in that area. Sometimes we do build stuff in there, and up to 20% incursion is now considered to be a minor encroachment. But when you put a fence up to protect that, you can't run the fence through the middle of the building. You have to. It doesn't follow the theoretical.
Okay, so the standard looks at that. That's a good question. As I understand what's written here, and that's my understanding of it. And remember, Peter, that I'm biased because I've been involved in the discussion. Is if you're protecting that part under the suspended slab, for example, or cantilevered slab, you would still show that as a part of your tree protection area. That area is protected.
Your tree protection plan would show where you want the fence to go, for example.
Right. Your tree protection plan will also show you where the tree protection area is.
Okay, so you show both on there.
And so you will show areas with, I think the standard uses the term ground protection. I use the word load sharing surface, where your devices are going to be that are going to protect the tree. And tree protection is not just about fences. It's as much about mulch, road plates, irrigation, trunk protection, canopy protection. All of those are things that account not just where a fence is going to be.
Yeah, that's right.
Ideally, those things would all be shown on the plans. And I don't, by any means, I'm not good at CAD or anything like that, as you know, Peter. I think you should even show where the signs are going to be placed. In a perfect set of drawings, that would be ideal.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's fine. I'm good with that.
In certain cases, it is possible to encroach into or make variations to the standard NRA. Encroachments include excavation, compaction, and machine trenching. So those are some things. We've got minor encroachments as much as it was, except we now have an encroachment is less than 20%. So up to 20%, but not including 20% minor encroachment. Once you hit that 20%, it's now considered to be a major encroachment.
Oh, I think there's a definition somewhere else that says the opposite, that it's up to and including 20%. I don't remember where that is, though.
That'll be at the beginning. So again, you can check that out. It'll be in definitions. I'll have to go back through. I'll hate you for it, but that's okay. in the definition section, it'll tell you .3. Minor encroachment. Ah, you're right. There's two different ones. There's 20% or less. So yeah, we need to pick between one of those two, or not any of those two, depending on what various people have said. Again, the committee's there to take on board suggestions, but not necessarily.
Where was that other definition, Mark?
3.2 is the minor encroachment, and the other one's 1.3 in definitions.
So 3.3.2.
Same as it was in the old version of the standard. So lots of things in the standard are the same, just words have been tweaked. The major encroachment, again, it's possible, and you're right, Peter, it's that previous one that is wrong, and you'll probably find that someone's picked that up in those 9 comments.
Don't think so, but anyway.
Yeah, so great. Make sure that you get it in there and you make the comments.
So do you think it's meant to be less than 20%? But
no, it's up to 20%, up to 20%, and 20% and more is a major, more than 20% is a major encroachment. So if you had a protection area of 100 square meters, and you only had a 20 square meter exactly encroachment, that would be a minor encroachment.
Okay, so that's the first definition.
That was the intention of it. Yeah, it sets an absolute.
It makes more sense. It's kind of splitting hairs if you say, well, 19.9 is minor and 20 is major. It just
hang on, it's splitting hairs when you say 20 is major, 20.00001 is major and 20 is minor. And again,
it makes sense because it's bigger than 20%. It might be bigger by
these are points in the sand that are not in any way restrictive to development. So the standard, again, same as the first one, was neither for nor against development, for or against the removal of trees. It's simply a standard that has trigger points and lays out a process.
Yeah.
And then when determining potential impacts on the NRA, the following should be considered. Notice that it should, not shall. So there are things here that you might just ignore completely. The tree is basically upright. Well, you're not going to think about lean and stability of the tree if there's not an effect on the structural root zone. You're just going to say, well, that's something that is irrelevant. And
the root investigation hasn't gone away, I notice.
Root investigation is still there. There's no reason to get rid of root investigation. The question is, how do you process that? And we don't give any guidance on it. So the standard is silent on how to deal with it. And again, there was a great suggestion, as I mentioned, by I'm pretty sure it was Jackie Brown, who said, look, maybe there's a point to which minor encroachments should stay at 10%. At 20%, you should do X, Y, and Z, and that should be mandated in the things. And at 30%, you should do A, B, and C, and that should be mandated. And there's merit in that sort of approach. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what we're going to get at this point in time. This standard is gone out to public draft. We'll take on board the obvious mistakes and errors, the lack of clarity, and fix that up where we can. But bigger changes like that sort of a change, in my mind, is unlikely to get done in the time frame. And so that is something that'll probably go into the futures, like the flowchart. I think the committee was overall in favour of having a great representative flowchart. We started the work, and it was really obvious that we weren't going to get that flowchart to a level that we were happy with in the time frame available. So it just has to flow over to the next version of the standard. Structural root zone hasn't changed. Still the same old, with all of its issues and problems and all of its advantages.
Where that calculation came from, who thought that up? And
It's Maddox equation.
oh, it's Maddox.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it has some issues, but again, there's nothing that says you can't do things in the structural root zone. Your job as an arborist is to understand the limits of Maddox equation and the applicability. So if you're in deep sandy soil with massive numbers of sinker roots, then this may not be an appropriate.
I quite like the structural root zone calculation because it seems to make sense in most cases. So good enough.
Yeah, and again, not too much of what we do is in the structural root zone in most cases. Crown management, and I think this is where you go into those drawings that you've got some concerns about. And so we're just showing you what might be a tree protection area in this case. And, you know, this could be a tree with a big trunk. And let me think of something, perhaps taxodium, something like that. You know, 1.5 metre diameter trunk, but it's only 8 metre wide canopy spread, you know, narrow form tree. So again, this wasn't meant to represent, Peter, that that's always the case.
Mm.
And I guess one way of drawing that might be to, you know, have the crown go out, half the crown go in.
Yeah, look, I think it's just, as you mentioned before, when you're doing this, you think that's what it means, but somebody else comes along and reads it and thinks something else.
Yeah, so put that in, because again, because the committee members have been working with the standard and have been conversing and discussing this and mulling backwards and forwards.
It makes sense now that you've made that explanation, but
that may need to be in there. So don't rely on my explanation. Make sure that this document communicates. Remember, the purpose of writing a report is to communicate. Purpose of writing a standard is to communicate without loss of precision. And there's really obvious, as I read some comments through here and I commented, you'll see I've commented on 75 of them so far. There are the things that aren't clear and things that are wrong, and we've made mistakes that need to be fixed. So, but I think this represents, you know, a tree root plate, for example, a lot better than what we used to have. And, you know, it shows how to deal with crown asymmetry. We want to protect the crown. But yes, I also take the point that that's a long way out, and, you know, it's indicative, it's stylized. And someone else made a comment about one of the other ones. We said the same thing. You know, no, we're not going to go out and scale everything in and make it all perfect, but maybe we should.
Maybe all they need to do is just have a note on there saying indicative only.
Stylized.
Or stylized, yeah.
Yeah. Again, maybe. Then we've got minor encroachment issues. No, that's in the wrong spot. I'm down here now. Protective fences. You notice that we've gone away from that horrible verbal form of fence that is used in Australia, the word fencing, just because it's a problem word with English second language. So we're trying to make it clearer, trying to make it a little bit more precise.
So you don't have to have several people there with their foils and headgear on.
No, and that's right. And we're not using the verbal form of a noun to describe a noun. Although we did keep scaffolding. And, you know, again, it's just trying to avoid confusion where we can. Fences wasn't a big change, so that's where we ended up with. Signs, again, not much has changed. This has caused confusion. What is actually enclosed is the tree protection area. The area that will finally be protected is the tree protection area. It used to be called the tree protection zone. The area that used to be the nominal root area was also called the tree protection zone. So that's where people are finding it difficult, is coming up with this. There needs to be two different terms for the one for two different things. They cannot be given the same name. So this is definitely TPA. Someone's commented below saying it should be NRA. It's not. It's a TPZ. And that's fine. Again, we need to communicate better, and clearly we've got room to do that. Other tree protection measures. We list a number of those down now. When fence cannot be installed, the example you just said, Peter, we're going to put a building over it or require temporary removal. Someone wants to bring a machine through. How are we going to handle that? So we may need trunk and branch protection. Ground protection is what the standard calls it. We've got rid of the arboricultural term rumble boards, and we've replaced it with wide wooden boards strapped together over mulch or aggregate. Why? Because the word or the term rumble board occurs almost exclusively worldwide just in arboriculture. So it just wasn't clear. So hopefully that clarifies why that change was made. Root protection during work. Again, all of these comments are valuable to us in terms of trying to come up with a better thing. To the fifth card, keeping the area moist is usually only one aspect of how it is to be maintained. Preventing the areas from waterlogging is also relevant in some situations that arise, and that would be a valid comment. The standard is about a process. It's not about being comprehensive in terms of discussing every permeation and variation that might occur. But maybe we need to adjust that to keeping soil moisture levels within the optimal ranges. And so those are the things that we'll come back and have a look at based on the things that people have said. What have we skipped? What have we missed? What can we do to make this document communicate better? Changes associated with drainage implications can be managed in various ways using material that is coarser or more porous than the underlying material. We actually do discuss that elsewhere in the soil standard. And again, it's one of those things, where do you discuss things and how familiar should someone be with the document? Installing underground surfaces. One change here is we've got the invert level of our directional boring. We say it should be at least 0.6 meters below the surface, and ideally outside the structural root zone, completely different to what we used to have. Does anyone want to guess why we want it outside the structural root zone?
I guess because of sinker roots.
Sinker roots, yeah. Hamilton says sinker roots close to the tree, try and avoid it as far as possible. So we understood that. As I said, scaffoldings remained as the word scaffolding, the verbal form and the noun form together. Interesting, it's an Australian use of language. So not a lot has changed there except the typical indicative scaffolding within the TPA, tree protection area, rather than the structural root zone. The tree protection specifications should ensure that the tree protection area is maintained for the duration of the project. It may include mulching, irrigation, and weed control. So it doesn't have to include those things. It may. I just wrote a arborist report for a development site, and I included mowing. I figure if the household is mowing the grass in the tree protection zone, they're probably taking reasonable care of the tree. Again, tree protection specifications and tree protection plan. Oh, there's a mistake there. That should be TPP. And somebody has picked that up in the comments. I'm pretty sure I read that. tree removal, we discuss how that process, and again, that's all fairly basic and people are overly happy with that. Fences and other protection measures shall be installed to conform with Section 4 and as detailed in the tree protection plan. So you have to draw a plan to show where to put the devices. You ideally will give some dimensions to those as well. So it'll be, 3 meters from this way and so on, to add clarity. Verse 2, fences and other protection measures shall be installed to conform with Section 4. Yeah, I mean, it's a fair comment. They want to have anti-PPS put in again. Committee will make a decision on that. So, yeah, those are the sort of comments that we're hoping to get and are getting, which is great. General, want to make sure that your protection activities during construction are right. Site establishment, the things that we want to have considered there. Demolition and construction, covered there, and landscaping works. And again, there's not a lot there. Practical completion, somebody's made a comment that, again, we'll look at, but again, not major changes in that end of the world. Post-construction, defects liability period, so there may be some requirement to look after the tree for a period of time onwards, and I would hope so. I like a year as a minimum, just to make sure that you wouldn't buy a roofing job on your house that they said, look, we're not going to guarantee it past the next a good storm. You'd want to make sure that it was going to survive, and so I think we should do the same when it comes to trees. Then we have appendices. We've got some drawings on of the tree protection. That's much the same as it used to be, and I don't think there's much there that's of concern. I think there was one error somewhere there that had to be fixed. Then this is the informative part, so this is just added into the standard to help educate and help people that don't understand tree talk that we've got, some of those bits and pieces. So, we've got some stuff generally on trees, then the roots. Again, there's some discussion there as to whether we should keep more scientific terms. Again, that'll be up to a committee to decide. I don't get to make that decision. Trunks and branches, again, no issues there. Stuff on leaves. And you'll see our diagram has changed. We no longer have suicide roots, thank goodness. We've saved the tree. It's not that there aren't trees that do produce suicide roots, most notably Phoenix canariensis do, but they're not normal. And you'll see this drawing has incorporation of a number of deeper roots into the process. So we looked at what we could illustrate, and the Stands Australia illustrator was fantastic to work with. And so we pulled up about 160 different root systems that had been exposed and drawn. And we said, any one of these is going to have somebody arguing that there's a different root system. And their answer is, there is. This is just, again, a representative sample, not necessarily what all or even most trees look like. The effects of development on trees, again, we're educating our reader. So crown damage, trunk damage, and each of these people have given, again, useful comments, just so you get an idea. So read through the comments section before you make your comments, just so that what you communicate works in well with what other people have suggested, and they may give you something that is useful in that regard. Serious impacts may structurally weaken trees, has been replaced with large wounds, may decay in time, structurally weakened trees, which are two different concepts. And yes, they are two different concepts. I'm not sure why the first one needs to be reinstated. Serious impacts may structurally weaken trees. Yep, that'll be something for the committee to have a chinwag about. Root damage. Then conclusions, and then there are a few comments about the signs. Sign issues weren't compliant with the Australian standard, and in part that's because the Australian standard wasn't made normative for the signs, because these are not a safety sign. So not a safety sign means that it doesn't have to follow the
just an example of a sign.
yeah.
One of the comments, I mean, some of the comments are fairly minor. So one of the comments I think is that there's no I in that list, GH.
Yeah, and I think you might have read my comment on that, is there probably should be an I. It's just one of those things. We took one out and didn't bother adjusting. Those things happen.
Some of the problems are fairly minor.
Yeah, there's a few comments about this one, and that's because these are not to scale. And it's interesting, the note says these examples are not to scale and are for illustrative purposes only, and yet you'll see there's a whole pile of things. So maybe we do need to make them to scale. So
I think it would be a good idea, because trying to communicate. So
yep, I take the point, but we thought that the concept was illustrative was enough, but it's clearly not. So we do have a brilliant CAD person on the team, so they will probably be spending some time doing all those and getting them to scale. And then bibliography, there were some complaints that there wasn't a lot of new text in there. Again, the aim was not to produce an exhaustive bibliography for the industry. That's what Google Scholar does. Stop being lazy. That's my view. Happy to sit down and write down a whole pile of things. I did that the other day on wind shear and trees. I think I might have mentioned that at the last meeting, but if not, I used 4,500 references that we worked through quickly, got it down to about 30 major ones, and thought, why do you need so many references in just an average report? So this is just some stuff that's a valuable bibliography. By no means is it exhaustive. Someone said one of the links don't work, and that's quite possible. Links are going to go out, and we can't control other people's websites. So if we can find an alternative, that's fine. But again, everyone should be able to figure out how to get a copy of these sort of publications. Some of them aren't in print, and that's a little difficult as well, but a lot are. So that's basically a summary. Not a huge amount of change, but hopefully some improvement and clarity on the language. Certainly some shortcomings from it, so they're not by any means perfect, but I think we're closer to the mark than where we were.
Mark, going back to the 20% encroachment,
yep.
Are we still having a similar area of compensation?
Yes, the standard says that where possible, in most cases, you should be having the same area made available contiguous to the NRA. So you're ideally
a couple of times. I don't remember where, but I'm pretty sure I saw it made a couple of times.
Yeah, no, we kept it in there. That was one of the things we looked at. And again, what do I do when I transplant, Rob? I just looked at a 3.2 meter diameter fig tree today. It's going to get moved if it gets moved with a 10 meter by 10 meter root plate. Boy, that's a problem. I've got to add soiling contiguous to that somewhere. where do I put the remainder of that that soil? And the answer is we move it, put it in the ground, and then make soil available. So I would argue that there are times when you're going to do more damage, and then you need to demonstrate that with your care and your monitoring, that the net result will be the tree in the long run will be appropriately responsive, and you'll have a tree that becomes a valuable part. And they're good examples of that. And my favourite one, without exception, is the Buckland Yew. Buckland Yew is in Buckland in south of England, in the churchyard there, and it was moved by William Barron in 1870. It was just over 1,200 years old, so only a pup, not an old tree by any stretch of the imagination. It had a trunk diameter of about 2.4 metres. It was moved with a 5 metre by 5 metre root plate, roughly. I know it's eventually going to die. In 2007, it dropped a big branch, but it's still doing well for itself. How do we account for trees like that? Under the standard, a lot of people will say, let's get rid of the tree altogether. William Barron said, that's dumb. It's the short word of it. It's dumb. Why would you get rid of a beautiful old tree like that? Let's move it and keep it alive. Well, if I can move it with a root plate that size, maybe I can protect it with a root plate that's a little bigger, but not have to follow everything that stands. So our job as a consulting arborist, and I've said this many times, and certainly in the presentation series I did, our job as an arborist is not dealing with the 10% encroachment or the 20% encroachment, the minor encroachment. Our job is, how do we deal with the major encroachment? That's what we get paid for. And if we can't do that, then the old standard and this current draft says you're not worth paying. Essentially, that's the job of the arborist, is to deal with the outside the norm. It's not that we don't deal with the norm as well. Minor encroachments and no encroachments, we should be able to deal with those with our eyes closed. But the real value of us as people is, how do I keep a tree, get as close to the optimum yield as possible without significantly impacting on the long-term health of the tree? And if we can do that, then we've got a win-win.
It says in D 3.4 root damage at the very bottom, sometimes a tree can take many years to decline and eventually die from root damage. Do you agree with that?
I don't. The answer is yes. It can be the case, but it's rare. What happens is once you cut roots, trees start to generate new roots.
So I just think that if it's very rare, then it's inappropriate to put something like that in there, because
you can make your comments. I mean, what happens is over time, and the complications are, you go out, you cut the roots, you damage the tree, you irrigate it, it's looked after, and I can see, a whole part of it went on in the Olympic site here, and then 4 years after the Olympics, the irrigation system fails, and everyone says, let's never repair it. And then you start seeing, the attrition process start again. In most cases, trees are better off 5 years down the line and 10 years down the line aren't declining rapidly from the damage that occurred 10 years beforehand. They're usually declining from some other thing, and we've mixed causation with
misunderstanding about how damage or decay can move in roots. There seems to be an apprehension that roots are easily infected with pathogens and the decay can rapidly increase, whereas my understanding is that that's not really the case.
It depends, Peter. There are lots of variables, species specific. So we're talking about poplar or willow roots as opposed to eucalyptus roots. They're going to be different because the level of extractives that are present, and whether you're talking about roots that are primarily sapwood or roots that are primarily heartwood, there's a difference.
When you read this stuff, it looks like that's the norm, and the roots that don't support decay or aren't subject to decay are the exception, and it's actually the other way around.
Yes, that's right. And again, I'm not sure how that's dealt with in terms of this process. I think that's a process probably not to do with the standard, but more so our educational systems.
I think that standard should at least not promulgate poor quality information.
I think standards, as I said, it may well be that things won't get changed. Everything won't get changed in this. The comment about vigor, and I'm quite outspoken about it. I believe that the word vigor relates to the genetic potential. That's the way the word makes perfectly sense, the way Shigo defined it. And so I think vitality, vigor, and health are three different things. And I follow Shigo's definition of that. That got to the discussion stage, and it was agreed by consensus, in that case, majority consensus, that we would not change. And I'm not prepared to stop the changes that we can get in the standards for arguing a point that I'm convinced I'm right on. That's just not the purpose of the standard. Remember that the standard is not about trying to produce a perfect document. I used to think it was.
I think you should choose battles as well. So if something's going to have fairly minor effect out there in the wild, then it's not worth dying in a trench over. But if something is going to have a big effect, then yeah, you should put a bit more effort into.
And look, vigor, vitality, health is one that I can continue to work on in terms of education when we do anatomy. When I do talks, and hopefully. Over time, there'll be enough people to start picking up and adopting the correct terminology.
I think a lot of people that read arborist reports wouldn't notice if you use those terms interchangeably and wouldn't.
And incorrectly, yes.
You were doing it, let alone that there's a difference in the meaning.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think that it's same with anything. I mean, Andrew Benson made the comment that we should use the word fine roots. And my problem with fine roots is for the first 10 years as an arborist, I got fine roots and absorbing roots, the bits that take up water and solutes or assimilates, call them whatever you want. I got those wrong because fine roots was just so nondescript. And my experience is lecturing anywhere in the world, 8 out of 10 arborists find it difficult to tell and show me the difference between an absorbing root and a woody root. And if that's the case, then we need to change the way we communicate it. Fine roots is not doing the trick.
I think if we can get away from calling them feeder roots, then that's good enough for this iteration.
We've got that. That's easy now. But again, it sometimes, as I said, and this might just my view, deviating from the scientific language sometimes helps. I mean, for goodness sakes, cupboard door failure. What sort of moron would think of calling something a cupboard door failure? Well, a guy with a PhD or two, who says, I need to communicate, the flapping door problem of a codominant stem with included bark failing on one side only. And it draws that picture. I get it. And so sometimes I think as arborists, we need to deviate from the scientific language to communicate better.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a useful thing to do, because even though the scientific correct term might be very descriptive and precise, but if nobody really understands what you mean, then it's a waste of time.
I know they don't, because I struggle with it, and struggle with the lack. The concept, for example, with roots of ground tissue. This is such a shocking phraseology for what we're talking about, and yet that's what science has adopted. PS1 and PS2, photosystem 1, photosystem 2. For goodness sakes, when they found photosystem 2, why didn't they figure out changing PS1 when they found PS1? Why didn't they just reorder them? Oh no, can't do that. So everything starts with photosystem 2 and goes to photosystem 1. Okay, well, if that's the way you want to do it. And there's lots of things in science that are like that, and they're frustrating. And another one's how we describe hairy things in botany. There's so many terms for hairy things in botany. I pull my hair out. Peter got frustrated with it one afternoon, and in one afternoon he went bald.
That's right.
So, you know, it's trying to balance the things, and yet, you know, we at least need to have familiarity with the language and be able to converse the other side of it. So the time comes when, you know, Andrew and I want to have a talk. I'm happy to go back to fine roots if that what Andrew needs for that discussion. But, you know, absorbing roots, the thing I like about it is it's a functional description. And if I could get away from woody roots and call them transport roots, I would. We've got structural roots. We know what they are because they provide structural support. So, you know, it's a difficult thing, and it's certainly been challenging to manage the fact that there are on the committee 8 or 9, whatever it is, it tells you at the front, individuals that all have a different view, and trying to get to a stage where you can get consensus. And the fact that we've made the changes that we have shows you that there is as I said, almost everything that we've done has been on a 100% consensus rather than a majority consensus. I suspect the next stage will be a little bit more tight because now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty bits. But overall, I think separating the language out, making it clear that there's a drawing and a set of specifications, I think is a massive improvement. And, you know, I attribute the specification concept to Peter Caster, who one day said, I don't use the word recommendation anymore because I gave all these recommendations and the builder said, well, they're only recommendations. They're not required. And so, you know, that one concept of having a set of specifications is something that a builder knows theoretically. They're meant to build to. I mean, I see building going on and I can't say that that's what happens, but if they don't do it and something goes wrong, we know whose fault that is too. It goes back to the builder. So yeah, get in there, have a quick look, find the things that annoy you the most, make a quick comment. As I said, try and read the comments in that section before you make yours, just to make sure that you're communicating in light of what others have said. I think that's a beneficial process.
When will it be finalised, Mark?
We should be ready to go out to print, I believe, sometime early next year. There's a hope going through. So I looked at the first 75 comments and felt that most of those could be resolved by the committee in a couple of meetings. I suspect with the extra stuff that we're having come in the late stage, there's another probably 75 comments. I mean, it might be 3 more meetings on that. So that could take us up to November, December. Then it's got to go to final edit. Everything's got to be, you know, as close as we can to perfect, because we don't want to put out an erratum on the standard, and then it'll go out to print. But if you look at this standard, this draft compared with the original draft, the language is clearer. The original draft of the first standard, you know, it was such confusing language. The grammar was incomplete, spelling mistakes, all sorts of horrors. So this has been at least a crisper process. So I'm hoping, Rob, that we'll have it ready to go to final editing and print about November-ish. And so it should be out in their new system, maybe February, March. I certainly don't think it'll go past June. There's always a chance that something will lock it up and we won't be able to get to a consensus. And that happened with one of our earlier standards. We agreed to do more research, did it, and then did a reissue. And that's the nursery stock standard. It went out, and 2 years later it was a revision. And remembering we've already got an approval for a revision in 3 to 5 years' time, and for the committee to work on it in the meantime. So the comments that people are making that we feel we can't resolve will probably get just put in a let's do this later, rather than trying to get it perfect at this stage. I think that's just unreasonable. You know, outside of the standard staff that are wonderful help and great people, everyone's a volunteer. And, even if you're in a paid position and volunteering, it still takes time. So I'm just glad that we've got as far as we did and, covered as much as we did in the time that we did. And certainly, whilst the concepts haven't changed, you've seen there are whole sections there where there's not a comment at all. And the reason for that is we've got to the stage where we've got those little bits right. And that's the exciting bit. Whereas, when we started, there was comments on pretty well all the way through the entire standard. So I'm happy with that.
That's really good. Thanks, Mark. That's been very interesting.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what comes out. Once it does get close to that coming out stage and we know it's there, we'll be talking about it, and we'll certainly be looking at how it should be used and those sort of things, and trying to communicate around some of those misnomers that the standard has. Most importantly, that you can't have a major encroachment, that's just garbage. That if you can't have a root protection area that's equal in size to the nominal root area, then the tree needs to go. And someone wrote that in one of the comments, and I'm sitting there thinking, where the hell did that come from? Because the standard, it makes explicit that it's neither for or against the removal of trees. So just because you can't protect it with the area that you want doesn't mean that you necessarily have to get rid of it. And what I find fascinating, and Peter certainly knows this from experience with me over the years, is I'm forever fascinated about how much crap trees will tolerate. And we talk about the Susan Street fig tree as a classic example. We cut 2 times trunk diameter away from the base of that tree, and it's healthier than it was at the time they started doing the development work. It's been a significant improvement in its health as a result of very simple care. We use one chemical. Water. I know. It's just, isn't that just madness? So I'm not saying that you trying to do that means you're not going to have the occasional failure, but I'd rather try and keep trees and occasionally have a failure than simply say, well, we can't keep the tree, let's just get rid of the tree. The alternative is, and it's a real problem for us in Sydney, real problem for Peter in the Northern Rivers, real problem in Melbourne. Where are you, Chris? Melbourne, real problem for you. Every time I go through North Melbourne, I think, boy, why aren't Melbourneites necking themselves? Is that you're creating urban sprawl. So it's this fine battle between how do I maintain big trees and give them enough space to become a great part of the urban fabric, and how do I get maximum yield? Those are the two conflicts. And if we can push those limits and get closer to the sweet spot, then I think that's better for everyone in the society. I want big trees. I want great, healthy, long-lived trees. I don't want trees falling over. At the same time, I don't want barren landscapes. And that's so often the response that we get. And when it pushes to the urban sprawl, when you get to North Melbourne, that's what it looks like. When you get to the western suburbs of Oran Park, or the new stuff outside the back of Rouse Hill in Sydney, you can look on a high hill and almost see no trees. And that's not the ideal development. I mean, in time it'll sort itself out. We'll plant trees. I mean, I looked at some beautiful historic 10 panoramas of Sydney City in the late 1800s, and it was almost a barren city, and now it's got a lot of trees. But trying to keep trees makes more sense than just getting rid of them. So again, the standard doesn't say get rid of the tree, and I have no idea where that mentality has come from. I can only, you're going to be 8 times trunk diameter away from that tree needs to be removed and you need to replant, is not what the standard says. And again, maybe in time we can address that in some section of the standard, maybe a section for myths. No, the standard does not say that you can't keep a tree just because you're coming 3 times trunk diameter away from it. That's a job between the consulting arborist and the decision makers. not a thing that the standard does.